There is a particular quality to a mother's faith, not the faith of certainty, that is a different thing entirely, easier and less costly. But the faith of a woman who has no evidence and no guarantee and no reasonable basis for her belief except the fact that she refuses, absolutely and without apology, to stop having it. Linda Mercer had that kind of faith. She had it through the years when people told her, gently, that she might need to accept something. She had it through the holidays that passed in the particular sharp silence of an empty chair. She had it through the nights when faith felt like the only available response to a darkness she could not see through and could not escape from and could not ask anyone else to carry for her. She kept the light on. Not metaphorically. Literally. The porch light of her house in Knoxville, Tennessee, which she turned on every evening regardless of whether she was expecting anyone, and which she turned off every morning, and which she turned on again every evening in the particular ritual of a woman who has decided that keeping the light on is something she can do, and so she will do it every day until she cannot anymore. She kept it on for 7 years. And then, on a Thursday evening in November, cold, clear, the particular stillness of an early winter night in the South, her doorbell rang. She looked through the glass in the front door. And standing on her porch, in the amber light she had kept burning for 7 years, was her son Jake. Thinner than she remembered, older, with his hands in his jacket pockets and an expression she recognized from his childhood. The expression he wore when he had done something wrong and had come, of his own will and at considerable personal cost, to say so. She opened the door, and she said, "Jake." And he said, "Hi, Mom. I'm sorry it took me so long." Jake Mercer had been, in his childhood and his early 20s, exactly the person his mother had raised him to be. Not perfect. Nobody's child is perfect, and Linda was not the kind of mother who confused love with the inability to see clearly. Jake was stubborn and occasionally careless, and had a temper that arrived without much warning and departed just as quickly. He had the particular intensity of a person who feels things at a volume other people can't always manage. But he was good. Linda knew that with the completeness of a woman who had watched him for 24 years. He was kind to people who had nothing to offer him in return. He showed up for his friends in the unglamorous ways, the moving days in the hospital waiting rooms and the 3 a.m. calls that nobody else wanted to take. He was funny in the dry, unexpected way of people who are intelligent without needing anyone to know it. He was, in his best moments, a person who made any room he was in a little bit warmer. He had worked construction after high school, not from lack of ambition, but from a genuine love of building things with his hands, of the particular satisfaction of watching something functional and solid emerge from raw materials. He was good at it. He had a small but growing reputation among the contractors he worked with as someone you wanted on your team, reliable, skilled, the kind of worker who arrived early and stayed until the job was done. And then, when Jake was 24, he fell in with a group of people that Linda had recognized, from the first time she met them, as people she would have chosen differently for him. Not criminals, nothing so dramatic, but people whose relationship to responsibility was loose in ways that Jake's had never been, and whose influence on him was, over the course of a year or so, visible in the way that influence always becomes visible, gradually, in the small choices, until the small choices have accumulated into something large. He lost the construction job. Not fired. He simply stopped showing up reliably, which amounted to the same thing. He moved in with the group of friends into a house that Linda drove past once and did not drive past again because what she saw in the driveway told her enough. He came home less. When he did come home, he was different in ways she could see but could not reach. A quality of distraction, of being partially somewhere else, that no amount of the right words or the right meals or the right combination of patience and directness could bridge. And then he stopped coming home at all. A text? 1 January. He was fine. He needed space. He would be in touch. He was not in touch. For 7 years. Linda was 51 when Jake disappeared into his own life. She was 61 when he came back. The decade between those two ages, the decade in which she turned on the porch light every evening and did not know where her son was sleeping and whether he was eating and whether the person he had been before had survived whatever the person he had become was living through. That decade is the story Linda carries with a particularity that only mothers carry things. She had other things in those years. A job she was proud of, She managed a medical practice in Knoxville, a job that required her to be organized and reliable and present, qualities that the years had refined rather than diminished. A daughter, Melissa, who was 36 and married and had 2 children and who was Linda's consistent, daily source of joy and ordinary love. A circle of friends who had known her since before Jake was born and who understood, without requiring explanation, that some things did not resolve in the usual time frame and that she simply needed to be accompanied in the caring rather than advised about it. She did not stop living. This is important to say. She did not fold herself into the waiting in a way that asked the rest of her life to pause. She went to work. She loved her grandchildren. She had dinners and went to church and took a watercolor class on Thursday evenings that she found unexpectedly absorbing and at which she was, to her own surprise, rather good. But she also turned on the porch light every evening. She also kept the room, Jake's bedroom, the one he had grown up in the back of the house with a window that looked out at the maple tree he had climbed approximately 800 times between the ages of 6 and 14. She kept it as it was, not as a shrine. She did not preserve it with the particular morbid exactness of someone who cannot accept a loss. She dusted it. She ate it sometimes. She changed the bedding every few months to keep it fresh. But she did not repurpose it. Did not clear it out for a guest room or storage or any of the practical reorganizations that a spare bedroom invites. It was Jake's room. It would be Jake's room until Jake came back for it or until she could no longer maintain the faith that he would. She also called. Not constantly. She was careful not to flood his silence with pressure, because pressure was not the way back with Jake. She had always known that. But occasionally, every few months, a short message, I love you. I am here. No pressure. Come home when you are ready. She did not know if he was receiving them. She did not know if the number was still his. She sent them anyway, because they were the truth, and because sending them was something she could do. And doing the small things you can do is, sometimes, the whole of what faith looks like from the outside. Jake told his mother, over the weeks and months after his return, the story of the 7 years. Not all at once. Not in a single confession that covered the distance cleanly, but in pieces, offered as he was ready to offer them, received as Linda was ready to receive them, which was, she found, always. The group of friends had, over time, led Jake into choices that had led him further from himself. He had struggled with substance abuse, marijuana first, and then, over a period of years, things harder and more costly. He had worked when he could and disappeared when he couldn't. He had moved from city to city, Nashville, Atlanta, Memphis, New Orleans, following whatever situation presented itself, living on the margins of a life rather than in the center of it. He had been, he told her, ashamed. Not of the choices themselves, he had been making them, which required a kind of self-permission that is incompatible with clear-eyed shame, but of what he had left behind. Of her, of the person she had raised him to be and the person he had become instead. Of the knowledge that if he called her, if he allowed the connection to exist in both directions rather than just sending her his occasional awareness that she was still there, he would have to be honest about where he was. And he could not face that honesty while he was still in the middle of it. He had gotten clean 2 years before he came home. Not quickly and not easily. Through a program in New Orleans that had required more of him than anything he had ever done, and through the particular work of rebuilding himself from a foundation he had allowed to erode so severely that the rebuilding was, in sight and moments, almost indistinguishable from building from scratch. He had gotten a job, construction again, because it was what he knew and because working with his hands gave him access to something that felt solid in a way that the years had made rare. He had a small apartment. He had, in the particular vocabulary of people who have come back from difficult places, a life that was manageable and sometimes good. And then, on a Thursday in November, he had done something he had been planning and postponing and planning again for 8 months. He had driven to Knoxville. He had parked 2 streets away from his mother's house and sat in the car for 4 to 5 minutes. And then he had walked to her front door. And he had rung the bell. And the porch light had been on. Of course it had. Linda did not cry when she opened the door. She told this to Melissa afterward, slightly surprised at herself, as if the absence of immediate tears required an explanation. But there was no explanation other than the simple truth. She had prepared herself for this moment in some form for 7 years, and when it arrived, what she felt was not the overwhelming flood of relief that she had imagined, but something quieter and more complete. Something that felt, simply, like, yes, this is what was supposed to happen. This is the thing I always knew was possible. She stepped back from the door. "Come in," she said. "Are you hungry?" Jake looked at her for a moment, at the practicality of it, at the absolute absence of recrimination or drama in the invitation, and his expression did something complicated and then settled. "Yeah," he said. "I am." She made him dinner. Not a special dinner, not something performed for the occasion. The same thing she would have made for herself that evening, chicken and rice and the salad she made every Thursday because she had been making it every Thursday for 30 years. She made it in the kitchen while Jake sat at the kitchen table, and she asked him questions about the drive and whether he wanted water or juice and whether he still took his coffee the same way. Black, no sugar, had been since he was 17 and had decided he was old enough to drink coffee and that adding anything to it was somehow beneath him. He still took it the same way. Some things survive. They ate dinner together, at the table where he had eaten every dinner of his childhood. Linda did not ask about the 7 years, not that evening, not at that table. There would be time for all of it. There was time. She had learned, in 7 years of keeping the light on, that patience is not only the capacity to wait. It is also the capacity to receive what arrives without immediately asking it to justify itself. He was here. That was enough for one Thursday evening. After dinner, she showed him his room. He stood in the doorway for a moment, looking at it. At the bed with the same quilt his grandmother had made. At the desk he had done his homework at. At the window with the view of the maple tree, now considerably larger than the tree he remembered. "You kept it," he said. "Of course," she said. He looked at her, and he said, "Mom, I don't deserve Jake." She said it gently, firmly, with the particular quality of a mother who has thought carefully about what she was going to say if this moment ever came, and who has arrived at a position she means completely. "You are my son. You don't come home to deserve your room. You come home because it's yours. It has always been yours. That's what home means." He was quiet, and then he sat down on the edge of the bed, and he put his face in his hands, and Linda sat down beside him, and she put her arm around her son, and she held on, for a very long time, in the room that had waited for him, under the light she had kept burning. Jake did not move back to Knoxville immediately. He had a life in New Orleans, a job, an apartment, a support network of people who understood his recovery and who were, in the particular way of people who have come through difficult things together, genuinely important to him. Those things mattered. They were the scaffolding that had made the return possible. And Linda, who had thought carefully about what receiving him meant, understood that the scaffolding needed to be respected rather than dismantled in the rush of a reunion. He visited, monthly, at Feist, a long drive or an occasional flight, a long weekend in the room that had waited. He called every Sunday, which he had never done before and which required no negotiation or request. He simply called. At 10 in the morning, the way Linda had always imagined Sunday morning calls from her son would go, and which she had not had until now. Melissa met him in December. This was its own complicated territory. Melissa had lived in her brother's absence for 7 years and had her own complicated relationship with what it had meant. She had watched her mother keep the light on. She had, in her private moments, felt the weight of being the present child while the absent one occupied so much of the room. She was not resentful. That is not who Melissa was, but she was real. She met Jake with the particular careful warmth of someone who is choosing to be generous and is doing it with full awareness of what the generosity costs. Jake understood. He told Linda, the night after the meeting, that he had known it would not be easy with Melissa and that he didn't expect it to be. "I didn't earn it yet," he said. "With her. I know that." Linda said, "You don't have to earn it, Jake. But you do have to show up. Consistently. For as long as it takes her to trust it." He nodded. "I can do that," he said. He did. By spring, Melissa was calling him. Not often. Not with the ease that would take longer to rebuild. But calling. A real call, on a Sunday afternoon, to tell him something about her children that she thought he would like to know. And he had listened and asked the right questions and made her laugh once at the end of the call, and she had said goodbye with a warmth that had not been in the December meeting. Small things. But the small things are how the large things are built. In June, Jake moved back to Knoxville. He found a construction job within a week. The reputation he had earned in his early 20s, preserved in the particular way of small cities where people remember who you were, worked in his favor. He found an apartment 2 miles from Linda's house. 2 miles, close enough that she could be there in 8 minutes if he needed her. Far enough that he had his own life in his own space and she had hers. The right distance. On his first Sunday in Knoxville, he drove to her house for dinner. He brought the wine, a bottle he had picked out with the particular care of someone who is learning, slowly, the specific language of showing up. Linda made chicken and rice and the Thursday salad. They ate at the kitchen table, and they talked, for 3 hours, about everything and nothing. The way a mother and son talk when they have found their way back to each other and have decided, together and without saying it directly, that the years between are the past, and this evening, this table, this wine, and this salad, and this specific quality of ordinary warmth is what they are building toward. The karma in this story is the porch light, not as metaphor, as fact. Jake told Linda, months after his return, that the thing that had finally moved him to get in the car and drive to Knoxville was a memory, not a dramatic one, not a moment of crisis or revelation. A simple memory of coming home late one night as a teenager, past curfew, expecting anger, and finding instead the porch light on and his mother in the kitchen making tea, and her looking up at him and saying simply, "Get some sleep. We'll talk in the morning." He said, "I kept thinking about that light. In New Orleans, when things were bad. I think the light is on. I don't know why that helped, but it did. It meant there was somewhere, even when I couldn't go there. It meant there was somewhere." Linda had kept the light on without knowing that he knew, without knowing that the light was reaching him in the dark even when she had no evidence that it was. That is the karma, the faithfulness of a love that did not require return to continue. And the return, in its own time, on its own terms, driving from New Orleans on a Thursday evening and parking 2 streets away and sitting in the car for 4 to 5 minutes before finding the courage to ring the bell. The return, when it came, found the light exactly as it had left it. Jake is in Knoxville now. He turns on his own porch light in the evenings. He has not said why. He does not need to. I want to speak to the ones who are keeping the light on. The mothers, the fathers, the siblings and the friends and the spouses and everyone else who loves someone who has gone somewhere they cannot follow, not geographically, necessarily, but in the deeper sense. Someone who has gone away from themselves, who has been lost in whatever way they are lost. Keep the light on. I know that sounds simple. I know that simple is not the same as easy, and that keeping a light on for 7 years while the world gently suggests that acceptance might be more realistic than hope is one of the most costly and difficult things a person can do. But keep it on. Not because it guarantees anything. Not because every person who is lost finds their way back. Some don't, and the grief of that is real, and I will not pretend otherwise. But because the light is something you can do. And the thing you can do is always worth doing when it is an act of love. Linda kept the porch light on for 7 years without knowing that it was reaching Jake in New Orleans in his darkest moments. She had no evidence of this. She had no reason to believe it. She simply knew that keeping it on was the true thing to do, and she did it. And in New Orleans, in the particular darkness of a life that had gone somewhere very far from itself, a man carried the memory of a porch light burning and understood, even when he could not yet act on the understanding, that there was somewhere, that there was a place that was his and that held him regardless of what he had done or failed to do. That is what the light meant. That is what you are doing when you keep it on. And to the ones who are still away, the Jakes, in their various cities and their various darknesses, I want to say this: the light is still on. Somebody has kept it burning. Park 2 streets away if you need to. Sit in the car for 4 to 5 minutes. And then ring the bell. This has been Soul Tales. And somewhere in Knoxville, Tennessee, on a Thursday evening, a porch light is on. Just in case. as it always has been, as it always will be. End.